All right, this is Torah 411 channel. We are discussing Enoch and Elijah today. Did they really go to heaven? Did something else happen to them? What is the context of these verses? A lot of people believe that Enoch and Elijah went to heaven, but Scripture doesn't really say that. So let's see what Scripture really says. Let's see the context. We got Sean explaining things a little bit better for us, and let's get right into it today.
In Genesis 5:24, we read that Enoch walked with God. And the verse before that says, his days were 365 years. If he did not die and continued to walk with God, then his years would have also continued. But that's not what it says. In Hebrews 11:5, we read that by faith Enoch was translated, and that he should not see death, and was not found because God had translated him. But before his translation, he had his testimony that he pleased God. This doesn't say that he went to heaven. If we look at this in context, we can see that many people were mentioned in regards to their faith. It mentions Abel, Enoch, Noah, Abraham, and Sarah. And if we go down a bit further, we see what happened to them. They all died in their faith, and that includes Enoch. Once again, in Genesis 5:24, Moses tells us that Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. And Paul says that he was not found because God translated him. Neither of these passages say that he went to heaven. So, if he was translated and not found, what does that mean? The word translated in Greek is metatithemi, if I said that right, and means to transfer. We see the same word in Acts 7:16, meaning carried over, like transported, moved from one place to another. Where he was translated to is unclear, but some have said that perhaps God transported Enoch somewhere else to keep him from being killed at a certain time. People didn't like his message about divine judgment and possibly were going to martyr him. So God supernaturally moved him somewhere else, and he was not found. So, what about Elijah? In 2 Kings 2:11, we read that a chariot of fire appeared, and Elijah went up by whirlwind into heaven. We also have to remember that the Bible speaks of three heavens. The first is the atmosphere of the earth, where the clouds are. The second is what we call space, where the planets and stars are found. And the third heaven is the location of God's throne. So which heaven did he go to? Logically, if there was a whirlwind, it was most likely into the first heaven and out of sight of the people. He did not go to where God's throne is because Jesus has told us that nobody has gone there except himself. He couldn't remain flying in the air forever, so where did he go? Scripture isn't clear, but we do get a hint. Elijah disappeared just before the new king Jehoram came into power. This was 849 BC. And Jehoshaphat died 4 years later in the year of 845 BC. And a different son after that, with the same name as Jehoram, took reign. And what happens next? God uses Elijah to write a letter and have it sent to the king. From the wording of the letter, it's clear that Elijah wrote it after these events had occurred because he speaks of them as past events, and of the disease being in the future. This proves that the letter was written in the 5th year after Elijah had been taken to another location by the whirlwind. Another thing people look at is the transfiguration of Jesus, where Moses and Elijah appeared as well. Moses, who all agreed died, and Elijah, who some believe did and some believe didn't. But regardless, Jesus tells them not to speak of this vision to nobody until he's risen from the dead. A vision is not a material manifestation, but a supernatural picture observed with the eyes. So, now we can go back to the original verse where Jesus tells us that nobody has been to heaven, that is, God's throne room, except Jesus. And hopefully, his words are even clearer than they were before. Scripture shows that Enoch did die, and that Elijah most likely did too, just someplace we don't know of. And that neither of them went to God's throne room in heaven. Otherwise, what Jesus said is not true, and that's impossible.
One thing I want to add here is that a whirlwind can also be a metaphor or idiom used to describe a troubling event that happens real suddenly. So Elijah could have been separated by a whirlwind or by the chariots of Israel and taken in a whirlwind, meaning there was something going on, some event that happened suddenly, and Elijah was needed quickly. So these men, the chariots had come to tell Elijah that he was needed right away. Another thing, going back to the heaven part, the temple was also idiomatically known as heaven. It was said to be the place where heaven and earth met, and the priests were actually called angels. So when it said he was taken to heaven by a whirlwind, there could have been something going on at the temple or something like that needed his immediate attention. So the men of Israel came on their chariots and told him something was going on where he was needed at the temple because there was some event happening. That could have been part of it, or it could have just been that he was just moved or transferred from one place to another by God. So we don't really know if it's just metaphorical, idiomatic, or what, but we know that he didn't go to heaven because, as you said later in Chronicles, we see him writing a letter to the new king, King Jeroboam, and that was at least probably 10 years, 5 to 10 years after the whirlwind ride. This is just another study where we try to put things in context, try to bring to you another perspective. Maybe it's something you've heard before. Maybe you haven't heard it before, but hit subscribe and like. Let's get this channel to start picking up some traffic here, and let's get the word out there. Let's start telling people what's in Scripture, what's truly in Scripture in the context, because then we can start doing away with some of these so-called contradictions that people say are in Scripture. So until next time, it's Torah 411 YouTube channel. Thank you.